This is all about Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things questions and markets related to Bitcoin, little b for the currency, and Bitcoin big B for the network. A collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation, all Bitcoin, all the time. Let's have a live look at Bitcoin right now. The CoinDesk Bitcoin price XBX index is now below the $30,000 threshold at $29,809. Bitcoin falling back just about 0.5%. The most reliable reference prices for institutions since 2014 are now published under the CoinDesk brand, trusted globally as the leader in crypto news, events, and data. All right, taking a look at our top headlines of the day. As host of an annual meeting of the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, El Salvador President Nayib Bukele is promoting the use and adoption of Bitcoin to 32 central banks and 12 financial officials representing emerging economies. The event, which concludes Wednesday, covers topics such as financial inclusion and the digital economy, according to Bukele. Meanwhile, Bitcoin mining appears to have survived a ban in China. From September 2021 to January of this year, China's contribution to the Bitcoin mining network was second only to that of the United States, according to the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance. Finally, Andreessen Horowitz releasing their inaugural State of Crypto report describing the crypto market as driven by a cycle where strong crypto prices attract talent into the space, developers innovate during a downturn, and the resulting projects and startups drive optimism once winter is over. A16Z saying Ethereum remains the dominant force in Web3 with an estimated wide range of between 7 million and 50 million active users, the firm estimating that Web3 could potentially reach 1 billion users by 2023, meaning we're still early in crypto.
The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app.
Bitcoin holding above, earlier above the $30,000 support level, now breaking it as global stocks were awash in a sea of green. Traders priced in expectations of a relaxation of rules in Shanghai after weeks of strict lockdowns, leading to a jump in Chinese stocks. Policymakers in Beijing are taking steps to alleviate the economic slowdown with various moves over the past week, helping to create more positive sentiment in the broader Asian market earlier. FX Pro saying there is little reason to argue that a prolonged rise will follow the current buying as the fundamentals such as tightening markets and slowing economy remain in place, with crypto markets still looking wobbly after last week's crisis on the Terra blockchain. All right, joining us now to discuss is Marc Lopresti. He's the managing director at the Strategic Funds. Hello there, Marc. So, earlier, we did see a bit of a relief rally, but now we see the markets back down. Where do you see Bitcoin's price?
Well, thanks for having me back, Christine. We're looking very carefully to see if Bitcoin will stay above what we view as a fairly critical 29,000 approximate level. If it breaks below 29,000, unfortunately, we think we could see a retracement to the 25, maybe mid-24 level, really hoping that doesn't happen. But we're looking at two really major and important indicators right now. The last chart you had up, certainly important, but we're looking particularly at the 200-day moving average. And as you know, we look to that 200-day moving average when there are 3 or 4 days consecutively where it breaks out above. That's a bullish indicator. Where it breaks below, that tends to be a bearish indicator. So we're looking at that really, really carefully. But 29K is really where we believe a critical level is. And, as we're talking right now, 29,868, a little dangerously close to that number.
And how do you view stocks and the dollar impacting the current Bitcoin price?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, and we talk about this a lot on this terrific show, Bitcoin has yet to fulfill its promise of being an inflation hedge or an asset that's uncorrelated to equity markets, particularly, of course, to risk assets. Bitcoin and crypto in general, but particularly Bitcoin, this being an all about Bitcoin show, remains pretty tightly correlated to equity markets and to risk assets. As we start to see, as we hope, particularly on some of the news that you mentioned earlier of the situation in China easing, China's industrial manufacturing perhaps starting to come back online to normal levels. and an easing in this risk off, right? This flight away from risk assets towards the so-called value assets, companies that produce consumer packaged goods and pay dividends and things of that nature, which we've seen since the beginning of this rotation and this commencement of this inflationary environment. So once we see that cooling, along with a bit of a dip in the dollar's bull run, which we actually saw today, the dollar easing relative to other fiat currencies, those are good indicators for Bitcoin, and we're hoping to see that happen. But again, we don't want to see Bitcoin dropping below that 29,000 resistance level, both from the perspective of sentiment, right? We have the fear and greed index pegged firmly to the left in the fear section at levels we haven't seen since March of 20. So we want to see it come out of that to start to get more comfortable that brighter days are ahead.
Right, so traders out there are still fearful. What sign do you need for there to be more bullish sentiment out there? What's the bull case?
Well, I think, look, the bull case, where we start to see Bitcoin from a price level perspective, we start to see that at around 32.5 or 33, where we're sort of looking at where buyers reside, buyers in size reside. I think we look at those kinds of numbers in terms of price action. I think we're very, very watchful of the regulatory environment right now, right? So any Bitcoin bull case could be very easily derailed if we have an extraordinary regulatory response to what happened last week in stablecoin, particularly Terra Luna. So if we see a measured response to that, which is what we're hoping, and that the regulators continue to watch how this plays out, that could give this Bitcoin bull case additional room to run. Again, assuming that we break out of this 29-31 range that we've been in for about 5 or 6 days now, with that 33 number being the next bull run level that we're looking for. But I think the biggest threat to that happening right now, Christine, is what the regulators may do.
I was going to follow up with what is the bear scenario? And you mentioned last week. I mean, last week, analysts were saying, we could see new lows. We could, we've seen drawdowns of Bitcoin 80%, potentially, like maybe we'll go below $20,000. But what do you think?
Well, so that's a great. I'm glad that you mentioned that 20,000 number, and what that's based on is looking back to what happened in March of 20. Right, you saw an 80% retracement. So just doing simple math from where we are right now, that would bring us down to 20. Back then, where Bitcoin famously went from 14 and change to 36 in that same time period. We don't see that happening. Market dynamics have changed. There's a lot more institutions involved now than there was in 20. Of course, 2021 was the year of institutional adoption of Bitcoin and crypto more broadly. There's more buyers. We just see more buyers. Folks like MicroStrategy, who have said, and we're hearing from different traders, are lined up to add to their Bitcoin positions. Particularly, again, they're looking at these same support resistance levels that we're looking at. But the bear case for Bitcoin could be something else extraordinary happening at the macro level. We get a really, really hot inflation indicator, whether it's the next CPI or PPI print. We get something unexpected in terms of the labor market, jobs report, unemployment, continuing claims, all of those things that tend to support the risk-off scenario, right? The case for the risk-off rotation, that's going to hurt Bitcoin and crypto in general, because, again, unfortunately, we're still correlated. It's still a risk asset, and we are still correlated to those kinds of market movements. Or
even a clampdown on regulation, as you were mentioning before. All right, Marc, we'll end it there.
Doubt.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was the Strategic Fund's Managing Director, Marc Lopresti. Coming up, more on the fallout of Terra Luna and UST with Swan Bitcoin CEO Cory Klippsten. Welcome back. The Luna Foundation Guard yesterday announcing they have just over 300 Bitcoin left after spending over 80,000 Bitcoins from their reserves to maintain the UST peg to the dollar, which catastrophically failed. More questions remain unanswered, however, such as who is the counterparty that was able to buy UST in exchange for Bitcoin? Joining us now to discuss is Swan Bitcoin CEO Cory Klippsten. Hi, Cory. So you've been with us throughout this collapse of the Terra Luna ecosystem. We know that Bitcoin was sent to Gemini and Binance, but seems to be a black box from there. And I wonder, after going through all this and arriving at this point in time, give me your thoughts and where do you think is this Bitcoin?
Well, if I knew, I would have already put it on Twitter. I actually don't know. I guess the best case scenario is they actually used it and sent it to market makers or to themselves, basically, to try to support the price of UST. That would be like the least nefarious thing to do. The potential sort of worst thing possible would be essentially to make people whole who had closer access to their money printer, essentially. So cashing out insiders at the expense of retail bag holders. So I don't think we know yet exactly what happened. And, the whole thing stinks to high heaven, regardless of what happened with the Bitcoin. The fact that they did it in the first place and trying to sort of wrap themselves in the Bitcoin flag was why I got interested in it. I always knew that at some point they'd be a forced seller because their whole scheme was a Ponzi scheme. Not surprising that it happened this way. I think what actually happened with the Bitcoin, whether it went to support, a peg for an asset that doesn't deserve to exist, or if it went to insiders, it's almost kind of a secondary point.
That's really the question. Did it go to over the counter or did it go to market makers on an exchange? Because, if it went on exchange to market makers, that makes sense to me. Then that could actually influence the price and have the effect of potentially giving confidence to investors. But if it was done over the counter, that wouldn't have any impact in the market whatsoever. So, Yeah, who's this counterparty that traded 80,000 Bitcoins for UST?
Yeah, I unfortunately don't have an answer for you.
Nobody does.
We'll have to sit here and wait to find out, if we ever find out.
Well, what is the impact to the crypto markets when 80,000 Bitcoins are traded for what is essentially now a worthless cryptocurrency?
Yeah, well, it certainly depressed the price a bit. So that was kind of an obvious one that was going to happen. But in some respects, it could be said that some people sort of falling for the bullish narrative of thinking that this was going to be a permanent pump with Luna being bidding up the price, sort of indefinitely. Probably piled into that trade and maybe drove Bitcoin up a bit, back in March, April. So in that respect, maybe we just kind of round tripped a little bit and people's hopium bubble got kind of burst there.
Yeah.
Either way, we're just really fortunate that this thing washed out and is gone and has taught a lot of people many lessons before it got to be, 5 or 10 times bigger.
Well, among the more optimistic takes for folks on Twitter, there's a tweet from Altcoin Gordon, for instance, saying that the Terra Foundation has dumped 80,000 Bitcoin so far, and Bitcoin is still holding above 30,000. I guess it was above 30,000 at the time. Interesting. So, from some folks' perspective, Bitcoin is holding out pretty well, considering that all that Bitcoin was dumped. It was able to, withstand that pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. Bitcoin, at the end of the day, it's a secular story. It's the invention of state-free money and money that can be sent over the internet, right? So in the long run, when you zoom out, it's just going to go up forever, Laura, even though you're Christine and I'm not Sailor. That is sort of game theoretically what's going to happen in the long run. It can be correlated with the queues over a short period of time. It can sort of get depressed a bit by Luna dumping their Bitcoin reserve. But in the long run, zoom out, it's still the best savings technology that we've ever had as humans on this planet. And, I'm just a proponent of buy often and hold.
Well, I'd be most flattered to be mistaken for Laura. But anyway, so what's next for Terra Luna? Right now, they are discussing plans to potentially fork. I mean, Do Kwon is saying, we'll call it Luna Classic. We'll erase UST from the books. Let's raise some more money.
I mean, just dead cat bounce, just machinations of people that can't let it go or are trying to kind of salvage the reputation by continuing to kind of try hard, like a hedge fund that, essentially has blown up and has a high water mark that they're never, ever going to reach, but they keep on working for a year before shutting down the funds just so that they don't burn their reputation completely. I think it's kind of like a good, give it the college try or something like that from Do Kwon's side. But, the team is decimated. They're scrambling. They don't know what they're doing. Most of the people are getting fired or they're leaving. There's kind of this diaspora of the supposed gigabrains running the Ponzi. So, I just don't care. It's over. It's not going to affect Bitcoin. Bitcoiners won't be fooled by this crap again, hopefully, ever.
I wonder, how is Swan Bitcoin doing this? Are you seeing an influx of users because of this?
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that.
Massive. Yeah. Especially this past week, it's just picked up dramatically. I think people realizing that so many of the places where they were, storing their coins or making their purchases or, thinking that they were getting some kind of like high interest savings account set up are realizing that some of these CeFi platforms were just, turning around and then parking it on Anchor, or taking it and putting in other risky degen box type DeFi platforms. And, that entire DeFi ecosystem, by some solid estimates last year, is 4 to 6x leverage. And so the unwind that you've seen in total value locked across DeFi is just completely off a cliff, which is the type of thing that you see when, essentially there's maybe a quarter, probably more like 15 or 20% of the actual capital is real capital that was committed, and the rest was just leverage. Mm-hmm. So these are leverage systems. They're leverage boxes, and they're created specifically just to let people get more and more leverage in the DeFi casino. And it's all sort of underpinned by faith that governance tokens will one day be worth something. And obviously that faith has completely dissipated because they actually weren't worth anything. And so it's just sucking the leverage out of the system really, really quickly, with the DeFi index down over 90%. And, Bitcoin is not part of that. There's Bitcoin and there's crypto, as it says in the congressional record, although they didn't say crypto.
All right. Cory Klippsten bursting the hopium bubbles for those DeFi optimists out there. We got ended there, but Cory, thank you as always for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Christine. Good to see you.
Swan Bitcoin CEO Cory Klippsten. That's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Christine Lee. We'll do it all over again tomorrow at 3 o'clock in New York. Also join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for First Mover. You're watching CoinDesk TV.